It was a stormy night when Christopher awoke. He had been feeling unwell for some hours now. Only the calming sound of the rain hitting the roof window had sent him to sleep. However, something different woke him up. It was the sudden unrest of his dog. The young Labrador used to sleep right next to him. This helped a lot when Christopher was sick. He loved his dog. This particular night, the dog seemed as though it didn't want to sleep. Christopher stood up, only to have the creature follow him downstairs. Maybe it needed to go outside. He played with the thought for a bit. It was very rainy and windy outside, and he was afraid the dog would get sick or hurt in the intense weather. In the end, he decided to go outside with the dog. It was about 3 in the morning when Christopher put on a raincoat and put the dog on a leash. His plan was to walk for a bit near the forest and use the trees to cover him from the rain. Little did he know something would wait for him there. After a short while, the dog went silent. It started sniffing the air around Christopher, who wasn't paying too much attention. The rain grew stronger, so he decided to go back. At the same moment, the dog started barking uncontrollably. Christopher looked around, just to be greeted by the sight of nothing. The surrounding landscape only had consisted of trees, ferns, and little hills. Now, on their way back, the dog would constantly bark and stare towards where they were coming from. All the while, Christopher kept looking around just to find nothing. Nothing except the moss-covered bark of the spruces and the hypnotizing waves of the hills that made up the landscape. Just as the two were about to leave the forest and Christopher's home was already in sight, a loud snapping noise made Christopher jump and his dog bark in terror. Yet again, nothing was visible to him. Only his dog seemed to notice the disturbance that was roaming around the forest. The rain was getting stronger by the minute, and it already felt like marbles were falling from the sky and hitting Christopher. But his dog kept focusing on a single spot in the trees, and whilst Christopher couldn't see anything, his dog sure did. It kept beaming in the same direction, as if someone was standing there. Coincidentally, that direction also was the origin of the large snapping noise. Suddenly, a second noise was heard. This time it was way louder, and also clear as to what the noise was. A large tree was visible. It was leaning unnaturally far to the side, and suddenly snapped in half. Pieces of the wood went flying like shrapnel, and Christopher began to run. Although his dog couldn't be motivated to move. No matter if he pulled the dog or held out a treat, the dog would not budge. This was very unusual behavior. The dog would always stay with him, especially when the weather was as bad as it was that night. Worse, it even started trotting into the same direction of the tree. Now almost 10 minutes had passed since the dog had stood still. Christopher kept calling out and pulling on the leash, but the dog has been going forward with all its force. Suddenly a third snap occurred right in front of Christopher and the dog. A large branch fell onto the leash, separating Christopher from the dog and ripping the leash apart. Suddenly the dog rushed into the forest as Christopher just looked at it in disbelief. Normally it had been afraid of the deeper parts of the forest, and now it was running right into them. Christopher did not give up, however, and found his way around the large spruce that had fallen onto the soft, gravelly path they had been traversing. Sprinting in between the large coniferous trees, he would soon realize that a dog could run a lot faster than a human, and certainly a lot faster in uneven terrain. He stopped at a large, snapped spruce. Once he was out of air, breathing heavily, he looked around to see if he could spot his lab. Although the only thing he would see were trees and fog, now it was pouring, and temperatures were at their lowest. If he stayed out there any longer, he might catch himself an infection or hypothermia, but he just couldn't leave his dog behind. Another loud snapping noise was audible in the distance, and Christopher thought he could make out the shape in the distance, far taller than any person could be. A pair of legs could be spotted standing still. Attached to these long legs was a torso, as they usually do. This torso possessed a pair of arms too. These arms were as long as the legs and as warped as the reflection one typically finds in the water of a river. The arms were slightly raised, and they were leading towards where the head was presumed, though it was obscured by the treetops, and the hands were made of long, thin fingers, which were as skeletal as the rest of the thin body. It did not move at all. At first, Christopher believed it was a freakish sort of movie prop or a sculpture made by an artist with a macabre sense of humor, but as he approached it, he saw the thing was holding something. Dangling from one of the hands was the leash that belonged to his dog, or rather the part that was still attached to the dog when it ran away. There was just one difference. The dog wasn't attached anymore. The rain got even stronger, and just before Christopher could see the face of the figure, a loud noise similar to the scream originated from it. One of the long fingers moved a bit, then all of the fingers started moving. Not too long after, the tall, spindly figure started walking into his direction. His fingers were bloody, and Christopher knew what had happened. He immediately turned around and ran as fast as he could, but the noise of the breaking branches and snapping trees would not leave him alone. Now, at the end of the forest, he could already see his home. Just a few hundred meters, he would be presumably safe. When he reached his porch, he turned around to see where his pursuer had gone. No trace of the creature was seen. It rained continuously for the next 3 days, and after the rain had stopped, police reported that the remains of a young man and his dog were found inside of a house near the forest. According to the officers, a large tree had fallen through the roof of the house, and since the man had been sleeping in the attic floor, he was killed instantly. His dog seemed as if it had been bitten in half by a large animal. However, no animals of corresponding size lived anywhere near the home of the victim, and the nearest tree was hundreds of meters away from the house, making it impossible to fall onto it. Police are still puzzled as to why or how this case happened, but reports of locals have indicated that something huge was moving through the forest that night. So next time you find yourself outside in the middle of the night, beware of the forest.